Let me start by apologizing. If by the time I'm done talking, you'll be upset, depressed, or even angry. But that is precisely my intention. I hope that we can channel that anger into some constructive conversation that will lead to solutions to some of the problems that I'm going to highlight in my talk. And I'll tell my talk through 3 short stories. The first I've called simply, Africa is not rising. So you see, I'm starting to annoy you. I think that there is quite a number of profound flaws to the Africa Rising narrative. The first one being, were coined not by an African, but a well-meaning Western journalist. Somebody who's standing outside, looking in, and comparing the state of the continent today to what it was 15 years ago. Obviously, it's better today than what it was 15 years ago. And we have embraced that narrative without questioning it. And I think that's why we are where we are, where I begin to question this whole idea of Africa Rising. And it's not the first time that we have believed without seeing. You know, the Africa Rising narrative is based on a very simplistic observation, an unfair comparison of the economic growth of some African countries over the last 10, 15 years, averaging something like 6 to 7%, compared to a very sluggish growth in the West. After the global financial crisis, the West has not been growing so fast. So, as usual, we accepted the name without questioning what it means. Now, the comparison between Africa and Europe is so unfair. I think that a fairer comparison would have been between Africa, a continent of about 1 billion people, and China in its rising years, about 20 years ago. China had also around 1 billion people. But if China could rise at 18% at the peak of its rising, why would 6 to 7% be called impressive? Unless, of course, we have accepted a special standard for Africa, a mediocre standard for Africa. Today, China is growing at 8%, and the whole world is calling it a recession. But Africa growing at 6% is special. Should we accept this standard as Africans? And if so, to what end? Why would we do that? The third flaw that I see in the Africa Rising narrative is that we have never actually tried to connect the so-called Africa's rise to decisions by Africans themselves, to connect the rise to decisions. I mean, the gentleman from Rwanda did demonstrate a link between his country's leadership decisions and the rise in life expectancy in his country. But that's Rwanda. That's not the whole of Africa. Africa is being painted with one brush as having risen. Everybody should be happy. But if you look at what has caused the GDP growth in these countries that have pushed up this average number, it's mostly commodities trade. But I don't remember African countries going out en masse to China, to India, marketing their commodities back in the 1990s when this trade started. It was the other way around. It's the Chinese who came looking. It's the Indians who came looking. It's the big Western oil conglomerates that came looking. Most times, facing resistance and all manner of issues from suspicious Africans who are sitting on resources whose value they don't even understand. That's what happened. That's how this rising occurred. It reminds me of a situation where if I'm on a highway and I'm stopped for speeding, I actually don't need the cop to remind me that I was driving above the speed limit. I actually know. It's just been caught. Because I'm driving. I know that I was driving above the speed limit. But what if I was being towed in my own car, and I'm sitting at the wheel of my car, and I have a towing truck in front of me, and we get stopped for speeding? What would I say if the cop came to me in my car that is being towed and said he wanted to give me a ticket for overspeeding? I would admit having oversped because my car is moving above the speed limit, but the guy responsible for the ticket must be the tow truck driver, not me. And because we have not bothered to understand what is driving our rise, but accepted the praise, I think that is a big flaw in this whole narrative that we need to start questioning. I'm going to try and back this up with some facts and figures. You know that in this century, but also even before, you cannot have meaningful development without electricity. Now, France has a population of 65 million people, yet it generates 4 times more electricity, 4 times, than all the 47 sub-Saharan African countries generate for their 805 million people. What that means is that a French person consumes 50 times more electricity than an African today. So what do you say if a Frenchman told you your continent is rising? You have to ask yourself, what exactly is he saying? And then there is a lot of talk about trade. Africa joining the world and becoming a partner in global trade. I don't know if you've checked, moving a ton of fertilizer from a US port to the Kenyan port of Mombasa, which is a 9,000-kilometer journey, costs $40. But moving the same ton of fertilizer from Mombasa to Kampala, 1,000 kilometers away, costs $120. That is 30 times. It costs 30 times more to move cargo across African borders than it costs to move cargo to African ports. So you cannot be rising if you are at such a disadvantage today, not last year, today. And then energy security. There's nothing more important to a country's security, to a country's progress, without energy, generally, energy security. Yet African countries, poor as they are today, they import $19 billion, sub-Saharan African countries, of oil every single year. That is against cash payments being made by African countries to oil producers elsewhere, against $16 billion a year received in the form of aid. That cannot be constituting rising. But now let's talk about aid. Now I know aid has come under a lot of criticism, but aid can actually work. And there are examples of good aid all over the place for us to see. Germany was a recipient of aid after the Second World War. So was Japan, so was South Korea, so was Malaysia, or even famous Singapore. They all received aid. But there's something special about them, which is they all, without exception, graduated from being aid recipients within 20 years. By the time those 20 years were over, they were actually giving aid to other people. But Africa, 60 years later, 60 years later, Africans are negotiating on a global stage the next form of aid they think they want to be getting. Why is it that we are not able to graduate from aid? Why is it we are not able to start giving aid to others 60 years later? And then, technology. I hear about African startups. CNN has a big program on that. And it's a good thing that we have some startups, some of them of a technology nature. But how much technology are we using in Africa? Most Africans are supposed to rely for their livelihoods on agriculture. Yet, whereas an American farmer producing maize can yield 10 tons of maize on 1 hectare planted, the best we have been able to do in Africa is 2 tons of maize per hectare. The problem is not just that difference. The problem for me is that 50 years ago, the gap wasn't that big. The gap wasn't that big. But while the rest of the world has moved forward in terms of use of technology in agriculture, Africa seems to have been marking time. That's a problem. Another is irrigation. Africa has abundant rainfall, has abundant lakes and rivers. But today, Africa has the lowest levels of irrigation in the whole world. And when I say lowest, that is whereas South Asia, which has similar weather patterns, is at 37% of farmland irrigated. The whole world is at 20% average. Africa is at 6%. 6%. That's irrigation. How about education? In education, countries have been praised in recent years, especially for their performance or improved performance in primary school enrollment, in girl education, universities being built. But we still have a problem, because in this day and age, where knowledge, higher level knowledge, not just basic knowledge, is going to determine the winners and losers of the global fight that is ongoing right now for control of the precious resources that are left in this world, Africa has the lowest levels of graduates per capita. With countries like South Korea, and you see what South Korea has done, at 67%, Finland at more than 70%, Africa still is at 3% today. So it's not looking very good. And then, share of global trade. Cocoa is an $80 billion business. Over the next 6 years, it will grow to $100 billion. 35% of the cocoa is produced in Cote d'Ivoire. Farmers, we're talking about rising, but the farmers of cocoa in West Africa have been experiencing a sinking experience, not rising. Because in the 80s, they used to get about 16% of the retail price of cocoa. Today, they get 6%. So that cannot be rising. And then there is a whole manner in which we manage our economies in Africa. In the past, we used to blame colonialists, but today, the threat to African economies, or destruction of African economies by Africans, the sabotage of our own economies by Africans is on the rise. Between 2009 and 2011, Nigeria lost 136 million barrels of oil through theft and other forms of sabotage. This was equivalent to about $1 billion US. The same amount of money Nigeria needed to import wheat, grain, and rice and other cereals over a 4-year period between 2009 and 2012. And environment, I think that is very important. As you will agree with me, the threat to African environment is not from nuclear waste or industrial waste. It is from us. Because in this 21st century, we continue to live the same way we did 1,000 years ago. Now, It's not only Africans who use charcoal and fuel wood to fire them, to cook and heat. 50% of the global population does. But it's only in sub-Saharan Africa where the use of charcoal and fuel wood is growing. And we have seen what it has done to our forests and to our rivers and to our biodiversity. Now, I want to say that there is no way you can be growing when you are destroying your environment, when you are killing your economy, when your education or the education levels of your people are so mediocre, when your share of global trade is declining, when you have no infrastructure and it's going to take you centuries to build to a level where you can be competitive. That is not rising. So I just wanted to put that in context. But that's not to say that Africa cannot rise. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we need to get real. We need to make sure that we do not mistake hype for reality. We do not mistake hope for achievement. That's all I'm saying. And my second story is about the unchanging behavior of Africans, and especially the leadership class. I'm going to compare what happened in my country 75 years ago to what's happening in Africa today. 75 years ago, a 40-year-old geologist from Canada called John Williamson stumbled across a very rich diamond mine in Africa, in my own country, as a matter of fact. And he was not even properly exploring. He just found people using big diamonds to play a traditional board game. And he made friends with the local chief and asked him if he could buy that piece of land where the mine was to stand until today. And the chief sold it to him for very little money and trinkets. And Williamson then went to the colonial government and asked for and obtained an exclusive license for mining in that particular area, which was promptly given, but also a law passed to make possession of diamonds by locals a criminal offense. And then he sent people around the villages to buy that diamond, and they bought it again for small money and trinkets. And he built a mine. He was a very, very good businessman. He died young, unfortunately, at the age of 58. But by the time he died, he was, if not the richest man in the world, but one of the richest people in the world. He had built the richest diamond mine in the world within 10 years of getting to that place. What did the people get? The local chief got a modern house, and the people in that area were allowed to use the water from the dams that he had put together for the mine workers, and they were allowed treatment in the clinic. Now fast forward to this day, and you see big headlines like, and these are true headlines, 5 of the world's biggest oil and gas discoveries were made in the world, were made in Africa in 2012. That's very exciting. We are all very excited. My own country made its own very big discoveries. We didn't make them. It's the latter day John Williamson made the discoveries 2 years ago. And do we know the value? We still don't know. Same like the old chief. And at how much did we sell it? Little money and trinkets. Nothing changes in Africa, especially when it comes to the way we lead and the way we are led. And I think that we cannot keep making the same mistakes and expecting different outcomes or better results. Something's got to give. We need to get our act together. I think it's possible for Africa to rise, but it won't do so until we get organized and we work differently, and we move forward differently. Now, finally, you must have been wondering what this map is all about. Now, this map is the map of parts of East Africa. But the reason I have it here is because some 10 years ago, some gentleman in the US engaged me in a conversation, and he said, "What do you think is going to be the cause for the next world war?" And I quickly said, oh, it must be oil and gas, of course. I mean, energy resources, people are always going to fight over them. He said, no, you're wrong. The next war is not going to be over oil and gas. The next war is going to be over fresh water. Because world population is growing, and by 2050, it's going to be such a scarce resource, people are going to have to fight for it. People are not going to fight over oil and gas because all the countries that would start a war have enough of that, but they don't have enough of fresh water. Now, I forgot all about it 10 years ago, until recently, in a conversation with somebody, he said, Ali, do you know that these 3 lakes, you see those lakes? Victoria to the north, and Lake Tanganyika, and Lake Malawi down there. Those 3 lakes, those 3, they hold 30% of all the fresh water the world has. Those 3 lakes, don't take my word for it, go online and check it out. They have more than 30% of all the fresh water the world has. Now, what if there is going to be a war about water? You know, I live somewhere there. So, I did not want to make this dire prediction for no reason. I'm saying it here in the hope that we are not going to fight over this, that we are going to be smarter, we are going to avoid this war, but more importantly, we are going to take care of this water. Thank you very much for listening to me.